If you're aiming to be a front-end developer in big tech companies like Microsoft, Walmart, Amazon, or even startups like Swiggy, Razorpay, Meesho, etc., then machine coding round is one of the most important interview rounds where companies provide us with a small project or an app that we are supposed to build in 1 or 2 hours. And the interviewer is actively involved during this round to evaluate our design, development, and clean code writing abilities. So that's why I've created this interview series where I'll discuss the most asked machine coding questions in our front-end interviews. And in today's video, we are going to build this employee database management system which was asked to me during one of my interviews for an e-commerce startup. So this is what we are supposed to build. So obviously the interviewer didn't provide me with the UI or anything. He just provided me with a few specifications. Like this employee database management should have a list of all of the employees on the left side. And whenever we click on each of the employees, we can see their details over here. And these are the initial dummy employees that we are going to add by preparing a JSON with all the important fields like name, email, mobile, date of birth, address, age, etc. Then we can have a feature to add an employee. So if I go on and say image URL is optional. If we add an image URL, it's going to take that particular image URL. Otherwise, it's going to give it this black dummy image. So let me quickly get an image URL from my Twitter over here, and let's just open this image in new tag. I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to add it over here. And I'm supposed to select a date of birth. So let me select my date of birth. Cool. And let's submit. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Yep. A new employee have been added over here. And similarly, we can also go on to delete any of the employees. So if I go on and click over here, if I delete this employee, yep, that employee has been deleted and we are back on the top of this list. I can delete this one as well, this one. We can delete as many employees as we like. Also, the complete code for this can be found on my GitHub. Link for it will be in the description down below. So the interviewer asked me to open code sandbox. So I'm going to create a new code sandbox over here with vanilla JavaScript. So I created this project in vanilla JavaScript. You can ask the interviewer if you're allowed to use React or not, or any other framework. But in most of the cases in these machine coding rounds, the interviewer will ask you to create this using vanilla JavaScript itself. That's why I'm using vanilla JavaScript over here. So let me remove everything. And the first step for us is to prepare a dummy JSON. So I'm going to create a new file over here called data.json. And actually I have already prepared this data. So I'm going to paste it over here and let me explain. So I've added ID, an image URL, the default image URL, first name, last name, email, contact number, age, date of birth, salary, and the address. And I've created this data for all of the employees. So the way that you structure your data in the JSON will be evaluated by the interviewer to see if you understand JSON well or not. So fine, that's the data for us. And let's go to index.js. And actually I'm going to go to index.html first. And so our script tag has already been added. I'm going to connect our style sheet as well. So just like that, and it's going to be inside of src styles.css, and simply inside this div, I'm going to remove this div actually. I'm going to say hello. I'm going to go to index.js, not you, index.js. I'm going to do a simple console log just to see if everything is working fine or not. Hello world. Yep, we see hello world over here and hello over here. Now let's create a basic HTML structure for our app. So I'm going to go to index.html div. I'm going to give it an ID of app. And now inside this div, I'm going to have a header. Inside this, I'm going to have an h1 tag which will contain the title of our app. And below this, I'm going to have a button for adding a new employee. For this, I'm going to say add employee. I'm going to give the class name to this button real quick. Now below this, I'm going to have a div where I'm going to render all of the employees and all of the details related to the employee. So I'm going to have a div with the class of employees. Inside this, I'm going to have another div with the class of employees. So you might be wondering why I gave this type of class name. It's because I'm following the BEM convention over here. It's a common way of writing CSS class name, which makes our code very readable. So all of these points, if you follow these good practices, it's gonna put a good impression on your interviewer that you're following all of these good practices. Now, inside this, I'm gonna have a span with the class name of Now, since this was nested one level deep, so that's why I've added this dash title over here, and this was one level deep, so I've added underscore names. So obviously you're going to find all of this information when you Google about this BEM convention. Now I'm going to give this title employee list. So this span, I'm going to have a div where I'm going to render all of these employees list. So this is going to have a class name of employee names, and it's going to be a list. Now similarly, I'm going to have another div where I'm going to render all of the details of a particular one single employee. So I'm going to copy this and paste it again, and this is going to be instead of employee's name, I'm going to say employee single, and below this employee single title, and I'm going to say employee information, and after that I'm gonna name it employee info. So I'm gonna follow a similar type of class name pattern over here. Cool. Now below this, actually I'm gonna leave the space for writing the code for adding the employee. So we're gonna add a model, as you may have seen earlier, that when we click on this add employee, I'm gonna create a new model. So I'm not gonna write HTML for that now. I'm gonna write HTML for that later. So that was our basic HTML. Let's jump onto our CSS file and write the basic CSS for it. First of all, I'm gonna provide the padding for the for top and bottom. It's gonna be 0. For horizontal, it's gonna be 10 pixel. Now I'm gonna declare a few CSS variables inside of this root. So for the button, I'm gonna have this color. For hovering of the button, I'm gonna have this color. For an item, this color. For model, and I've named our variable by using double dash, which is the convention for naming CSS variables. Okay, now inside of this, add more styling for our, first of all, for our header. Flex, justify, content, space, green. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything after writing this. Align items to center. So display flex, what it did, it brought both of these things inside of our header on one single line or one single row. After that, I've added this justify content space between, so that they can have a space between them and they can be on the both of the corner of this div. And the align item center, so that they can be centered vertically. If you don't have the knowledge of Flexbox and you want to understand it in depth, I've actually created a complete video on Flexbox. You can click the link in the description to watch that video. Now I'm gonna style our button over here. And for this button, I'm gonna provide some padding, some border radius, and I'm gonna remove the border. And then I'm gonna provide a background color, which is going to be of this color. So that's why I've used this RCSS variable over here, and cursor is going to be pointer, just like that. Cool. And now similarly, I'm gonna add a hover style to our button. So now if we hover on it, yep, you're gonna see that. Now let's work on this employee div over here. Employees, and display is gonna be flex, so that they can be in one single row. And after that, I'm gonna add a border to it on both of these div individually. So that's why I'm targeting div. I'm adding border, overflow Y is going to be scroll, so that this can be vertically scrolled. And the height is going to be 450 pixels. Now inside of this, we have a div called employee names. I'm gonna style that with the width of 30%, and for this one, I'm gonna give width of 70%. So employee single class will be width of 70%. That is this class over here. We could have also used CSS grid over here to give these dimensions, but I don't wanna make this video too complicated by bringing in grid and all, because a lot of people are comfortable with Flexbox. So that's why I'm explaining this with Flexbox. Now both of these are going to have some common styles. So I'm gonna add employee names and employee single under one bracket, and I'm gonna provide some padding, display flex, and flex direction column. Because if you remember, all of these employees were from top to bottom, that is flex direction column. Now I'm gonna target both of these over here and gonna provide them styling. They are also going to be having a similar style, so that's why I've put them under one bracket. And just like that, our basic styling is done. Now let's go on and write some logic for our app. So I'm gonna open our JavaScript file. I remove this console log. So first of all, I'm gonna write the logic for fetching all of these employees and rendering them inside of this employee list. And also the logic for selecting each of these employees. So I'm gonna add an iffy over here, which is going to be an asynchronous function. I'll tell you what an iffy is in just a minute. So as you can see, what's going on over here is I've created this function and I've wrapped this inside of a bracket, and I'm calling this function right over here. So this is what an iffy is. Iffy is an immediately invoked function expression, which will help us protect all of our variables and important data of our app. Cool, I'm gonna fetch our data first. So I'm gonna say const data equals await fetch. I'm gonna use this fetch function. So that's why I'm using this asynchronous keyword over here, because this function is obviously going to be an asynchronous operation, and I'm using await over here. So that's why I'm using async await to fetch the data. So if you are also supposed to fetch it from some API, you would also use the similar method. So currently I'm gonna say it's in the src. So /src data.json. This looks good. Let's console log this and check. Yep, we got this response over here. Awesome. But this is not in the JSON format, right? So I'm gonna create it in the JSON format. Const response equals await data.json. And now this will be in the JSON format. Yep, we got all of these objects inside of it. So this is what our data was that we had prepared in this data.json file. Now I'm gonna keep all of this response data inside of a variable. So I'm gonna select employees response, and I'm gonna use this employees variable to do all of our stuff that we are supposed to do. I'm gonna have a few more initial variables called selected employee ID, and it's going to be by default the first employee. So employees of 0.id, ID, just like that. And I'm gonna have selected employee object, that is going to be employee of 0th. Now I'm gonna target both of this list and this information div. So I'm gonna say const employee list document dot query selector, which we use to target a particular DOM element, and the class name for that element was employee names. So I'm gonna say, oops, not employee names, employee names list. So I'm gonna say dot and the name of the class, just like that. And for the info as well, we know this was employee names single. Did I write something wrong? Oh, this is supposed to be double underscore. Yeah. So cool. So we have target both of our DOM elements. I'm gonna add a few comments over here, which we're gonna come back to later. So after this, we are going to write add employee logic later. And we're also supposed to write the logic for selecting employee, select employee logic, right? Now let's quickly render all of these employees in this employee list. So for rendering our employees, I'm gonna add a new function called render employees, and it's going to be an arrow function. Doesn't matter, it can be arrow function, normal function, whatever you like. And I'm gonna call this render employees right over here at the end. So this function will actually render all of the list of all of the employees in this employee list column. And also we're supposed to render one single employee in this employee information. So for that, I'm gonna just add a comment over here, which we are going to come back to later. Now inside this function, before rendering all of the employees, I'm gonna make sure that this div is cleared out. So I'm gonna say employee list dot inner HTML is empty. Now after that, we're gonna start rendering. So employees, so we have this variable over here, employees. So I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna loop through it for each. Oops, yeah, like that. And this for each takes a callback employee, and inside of this I'm gonna say const employee equals document dot create element. So I'm going to create a new span and I'm going to add it inside of that employee list div. Span element. We are supposed to add the information inside of this span element, right? So I'm going to say employee dot class list. I'm going to add a class first so that we can add styling to this later. Employee. Now, if you remember, whenever we selected an employee, whenever the employee was selected, it had a darker tint than the others in the list, right? Whenever we select our employees, it should have a darker color so that we can identify that, yeah, this particular employee has been selected. So I'm just gonna add a condition over here real quick. So if parse int, I'm gonna take this selected employee ID. I'm gonna parse it into an integer because by default it is going to be in string, right? So if this is equal to employee.id emp, that is this variable over here, since we are looping all of the elements, right? So if it's similar to that, I'm just gonna add a class of selected to that particular span, just like that, and update the selected employee to emp. Now after that, I'm gonna provide an ID to this, which will be emp.id, so that we can identify this particular element uniquely in our DOM. Now finally, I'm gonna say employee.inner HTML. First of all, emp.first name. Let's see, is it there? Okay, we haven't added it into our DOM, so let's add add inside of our DOM to see if it's working. So employee list, so obviously we are supposed to add this inside this employee list div. So employee list dot append and employee. Let's see. Okay, they are over here, but they are in a one single line, so obviously we're supposed to style them, which I'm gonna do later on. So first name, last name, where is it? And also, if you remember, I had added that emoji for deleting a particular employee, so that's why I've added an icon over here with this X emoji and the class name of employee delete. Cool, so I guess this is what we are supposed to do basically. Yeah, and let's go on and style this. So our employee name list, I'm gonna give these styles. So display flex direction column, and below that I'm gonna style each of these elements. So cursor pointer, so that this has this pointer over here. Padding is going to be 10 pixels, 15 pixels, some margin, some text align, some background color with our background color variable, some border radius, display flex, and centering all of the element in the very between. So these are just basic CSS. Now let's add the class for hover and selected employee. So I'm gonna say employee names hover, then this background color. If the employee name is selected, then also this background color. So if you see, so now we are supposed to add the selected employee logic, so which we haven't added yet. I'm gonna go to this select employee logic, and I'm gonna say employee logic dot add event listener. I'm gonna add the event listener to each and every one of these buttons over here, or span over here. Now obviously I'm not gonna go and target each and every one of them, so that's why I'm gonna use a concept over here called event delegation, which is also one of the most important interview questions. So if you use such good practices, the interviewer is going to appreciate your development skills a lot. So now inside of this, I'm going to say if e.target.tag name, and we are supposed to target the span, right? So I'm going to say if the tag name is span and the selected employee ID is not equal to e.target.id. So now obviously if it's span and it's not equal to the current employee ID, what I'm going to do, I'm going to initialize this variable with e.target.id, so that is the selected employee currently. And then I'm going to render all of the employees again. And after that, we're supposed to render single employee as well. For which I'm going to create a function later on. Oh, you know what? Let me just create a function for this. So I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to say const render single employee. Obviously, I'm not going to add any functionality just yet. Oops. Employee. So I'm not going to add a functionality currently. I'm just going to render it empty. So yep, if I click on it over here, you can see this works absolutely fine. Awesome. Now, before moving forward, if you're preparing for your front-end interview and you would like me to guide you in your front-end interview preparation journey, just click the link in the description down below and book a call with me. I will provide you tips, tricks, roadmap, and all of the necessary resources you need to prepare for your front-end interview. So click the link in the description down below and book a one-on-one call with me. So now let's move on to writing the logic for rendering one single employee. Now inside of this function, I'm gonna add a comment over here, which is going to be for deleting employee, which we're gonna get back to later on. But let's focus on rendering one single employee over here. So simply I'm gonna say employee info, which was targeting this section of our app. Oops. This section of our app. So I'm gonna say dot inner HTML, and I'm gonna add first the image tag with the src of selected employee dot image URL, and I'm gonna close this tag. Now let's just see if this is working or not. So initially I'm just gonna say if there is a selected employee, then render single employee. There's something wrong. Oh, this is supposed to be inner HTML. HTML is supposed to be capital. So, oh, my bad. I think this is supposed to be info, not list. So I guess this will work now. Let me check the, yeah, this is single. Yeah, so that's working now. Cool. Now let me add more of the things like first name, last name, and the other things as well. So let me write that code real quick, and then I'll explain what I've done. Okay, so over here I've added a span tag. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Okay, so I've added a span tag over here with the first name, last name, and the age of the employee. Then I've added the address, the email, the contact number, and the date of birth. So if you scroll down over here, you're gonna see all of this information. Obviously this is not styled yet, so I'm gonna go on and style it. Let's go to our CSS, and I'm gonna add few styles. So first of all, the heading of the employee, that is this thing over here, employee single heading. I'm gonna style the name first. So text line will be center, some font size, some text transform to the uppercase, and padding of 5 pixels. Then let me just make the image a little bit smaller. Width 250, height 250, object fit contain, and border radius 50%. And for the other ones, they are going to be just generic. I'm gonna add display flex to them. So I have all of these elements over here. So I'm just gonna say right above it, display flex, flex direction column, and all of the items will be in the very center with the gap of 10 pixels. So yeah, there's that. And with this, we have created some basic functionality for our app. So if we select our employees, yep, you can see we can select them easily. Now, two main functionalities remain over here. First, add employee, and the second is deleting a particular employee. So let's work on add employee first. So I'm going to go back to our HTML, and so we have added this add employee model space for the add employee model over here. So I'm just going to quickly add a div, which will be called add employee. And inside of this, I'm going to have a form with the class name of add employee underscore create, just like that. It's not going to have any action. Now inside of this form, we are obviously supposed to create all of the fields for our model. So I'm gonna add a title for the model, which will be add a new employee. So as you can see, this is being rendered over here. Also, I'm supposed to create it outside, not inside of here. Just like that. Yeah, you can see it's being created outside. Now I'm gonna add a div for our first name and last name. Inside div, I've added an input field with type text. Name is going to be first name, placeholder first name, and it's going to be required. And similarly for the last name as well. Cool. Let's see what else do we have. We have image URL, email, contact number, salary, address, and all of those things. So let me just add them real quick. Let me explain. So we have added an input type text for the image as well with the name of image URL. So just like that. For email, type will be email. For contact number, for salary, for address, and for the input of date of birth, which is this one over here, which will help us input the date of birth. And I've given this class add employee create date DOB. And then at the last, we have a submit button to submit our form. Cool. So that was the basic HTML for this model. Let me style it real quick. So I'm going to go to styles.css. And since the class name is called add employee, I'm gonna provide the styles to add employee. So the width will be 100%, height will be 100%, so that it covers the complete screen. Actually, this add employee is more of a container for this model over here, this form model. This is going to be a container for that. So I've given this 100 width and height. Position is going to be absolute because obviously it's gonna be fixed at the very middle of the screen. Top and left will be 0, and justify content will be very center, and align items will be center, and background color will be the one that we had defined at the very top for our model. Now we're gonna center all of these elements to the very center of the screen. So add the styling to this add employee create. So over here we're just gonna say width to be 400 pixel, background to be white. Box shadow, I'm going to provide some box shadow as you can see over here. Some padding, some border radius, some text align to the center, and display is going to be flex, and it's going to be from top to bottom, that is column, and gap of 15 pixels between all of these. So yeah, I guess that's self-explanatory. And now let me style this div a little bit by adding display grid. As I already mentioned, you can use display grid over here as well. So I've provided it 48.1 and 48.1% of spacing that it can take in this div. So it has taken 48% over here, and some column gap of 15 pixels, so which you can see over here. Now let's style our inputs a little bit. So I'm gonna say add employee create, and I'm gonna target the input tags. So I've just provided some padding, some border radius of 5 pixel, and I've added some border, some light border of 1 pixel, solid this color over here. Now you might have noticed one thing, whenever we hover on these numbers, you can see these arrows over here. I don't want these arrows. So what I'm gonna simply do is I'm gonna say add employee create, and I'm gonna target input, and I'm gonna add this pseudo selector of WebKit outer spin button. And obviously you're not gonna remember writing this, so obviously you can Google it out. Usually the interviewers allow you such things. So I've put WebKit appearance to none and margin to 0. Now you can see there's no number arrow over here. Now for a submit button, I'm going to target our submit button class and add some padding, border radius, border, and some background color and cursor pointer. Simple button classes. Now whenever we hover on this, we want a hover class as well. So we want it to change the background similar to our previous button. So I've added this background color on hover. Now by default, this is going to be hidden, right? So I'm just going to go over here on add employee. I'm just gonna add display to none. We don't want to see that by default, right? We're gonna make it appear through our logic of JavaScript. So let's jump back to JavaScript, and I'm gonna target all of those classes. So over here we were supposed to write add employee logic, so I'm gonna target all of these classes: our button, our add employee class, and add employee create class. So let me quickly write the query selector for those, just like this. And below this, we're going to add the basic functionality of clicking this button and making the model appear. So I'm going to say create employee dot add event listener, and I'm going to add a click event, which will add employee model dot style dot display to flex. Let's test it out. Awesome. This works amazing. This works flawlessly. So now what we want, if you click on this gray area, we want this to close, right? So I'm going to say add employee model dot add event listener. I'm going to add an event listener of click. I'm going to take event inside of it. And simply, first of all, I'm going to check if e dot target dot class name is equal to add employee. If it's equal to add employee, that is, it's that gray area, then only we are supposed to close it. So add employee model dot style dot display to none. Let's see. Okay, it's not closing when I click over here. If I click on over here, it's gonna close. Cool. So now is the main part. So now we're gonna enter the information over here and click on this submit button to submit the form and make it appear right over here. I'm gonna say add employee form. I'm gonna target this DOM element, our form dot add event listener, and I'm gonna listen to a submit event. And I'm gonna say e dot prevent default so that it doesn't refreshes our page. And I'm going to say const form data equals new form data, add employee form. So it's going to take all of the data from the our add employee form DOM element, and it's going to convert that into a form data. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything as we go along. So let me just write this code first. So I'm going to say const values equals form data dot entries. So I'm going to take all of the data that we have inside of our form data and spread it over here. So now if we try to console log this value, let's open the console and try to enter something. Some contact, salary, address, some date of birth, submit. So yep, you can see we get all of this form data, first name, last name, image URL, email, and everything, right? So we're going to use that now. I'm going to take a new object called emp data. I'm going to create a JSON before, adding it to our object. So I'm going to say emp data, and I'm going to say values, and I'm going to iterate through all of the value. So value dot for each. Take every single value in this val variable. Say emp data value of 0. So if you remember, we had two things, right? We had the name of that particular field, and then we have the value for that particular field. So I'm going to say key will be the val of 0 and the value will be the val of 1. So if you don't remember, let me just show you again. Values. So if I click on submit, you're going to see we have two things, for first name and then the value. This will be the key and this will be the value. So that is how we are structuring our data inside of it. Now we're going to provide ID to each of those. So how do we provide the ID? So if you remember, if I open this, we had unique ID for all of these. emp data.id will be employees, whatever the length was, the last employee's ID plus 1. So if the last employee was 1010, so this is going to be 1011, just to uniquely identify them. Now, before moving forward, I forgot to do one thing. So for the date of birth, I'm going to add a check that employee should be at least greater than 18. So I'm going to, before this, I'm going to say const DOB input, that is date of birth input. I'm going to target that query selector. Class name was add employee create DOB. And over here, I'm going to say DOB input. I'm going to take that input and I'm going to say max the max value should be new date. I'm going to take the date and get year, get full year. And I'm going to minus 18 from that. And new date, to ISO string. And I'm going to slice 5,10. So let me show you what this does. So what this simply is doing is it's saying that this date of birth input, let me just open it. And yeah, if you click on it, now you're going to see that, yeah, this starts from October 2004. That is, if you try to select a date after this, you won't be able to select it. So employee has to be greater than 18 years of age to be added into the database. So now we can select over here. Now moving on, we are also supposed to calculate this number over here because we are not taking the input of this number from the user. So we are supposed to calculate it right over here. So after this, I'm going to say employee data dot age. And also notice I am using the exact same keyword that we are using over here, because obviously the JSON can't be different, right? Else this will give the error. So age will be new date dot get full year minus, so the current year minus the year that was being input. So parse data dot dob dot slice. I'm going to take out the year 0,4 and I'm going to parse it as a decimal, and the parse int requires this 10 to figure out if it's a hexadecimal or a decimal, etc. Cool. So that was the age. Now for the image URLs, so if the image URL is provided, we're going to use the image URL, else our default image, that is this one. So let me close this. Yeah, so emp data dot image URL, if it was provided, then we're gonna use it, else we're gonna use our default image URL. And after that, I'm gonna simply push everything inside of our employees variable. That is our object of employees. So that will be added to our list right over here. And also after that, where did it go? Yeah, we are supposed to re-render the complete list. So I'm gonna say render employees, and we are supposed to reset this form as well, right? So that this is empty. So I'm gonna say add employee form dot reset. And then after that, we are also supposed to close this modal. So I'm gonna take add employee modal and set the display to none. Just like that. Let's see if it works or not. Let me select the date of birth and submit. Yep, this has been added over here. Awesome. So we have done the hardest part of our app, that was adding an employee. Now let's create the functionality for deleting a particular employee.
Pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/Piyush_Eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video.
So it's nothing. It's pretty easy. So I've added this comment over here. I'm gonna say if e.target.tag name is equals to I. If you remember, we had added it inside of this I tag. So I'm gonna say employees. I'm gonna update the employees variable and filter out the current employee. So employees dot filter. You know what? I'm not supposed to add this over here. My bad. I'm supposed to add it inside of over here. So whenever we click on this, if the clicked element is this cross, so if the e.target.name is I, so if it's span, then we are selecting it. If it's I, then we are deleting it. So dot filter emp, and I'm going to convert this into a string first. emp.id. If it's not equal to e.target.parent node, I'm gonna target this parent node and take the ID. So just like that. But we are also supposed to render all of the complete list, and if let's say we are clicking on a selected employee, we should remove its information from this employee information section. I'm gonna say if string selected employee ID. So whatever the selected employee ID is, if it's equal to e.target.parent node.id, then we're going to say selected employee ID to be the first element of this object, that is this one, employees of ID. So first element, right? Else it's going to be -1 if it's empty. And then after selected employee ID has been updated, I'm going to update the selected employee as well similarly, and then render the single employee just like that. And also we are supposed to render all of the employees as well after this deletion has done. So render employees, and let's see if it's working. If I click on this, yep, that's delete, and the default was Faye. It was selected. If I delete this one, fine, it works. All right, cool. Now since we have added this -1 over here, I'm going to take care of that inside of over here. So I'm going to say if, while rendering a single employee, if the selected employee ID is equal to -1, then I'm going to say employee info dot inner HTML to be empty, and I'm going to return this so that there's no error in our app. So let me just delete everything, and after this will be -1. So yeah, it's empty. Awesome. This works great. And with this, our app is successfully completed. Now I have a homework for you. I want you to create an edit functionality for this app. Just create an edit button somewhere over here, which will open this modal again with all of the information pre-filled. And then you can edit that information and click on submit again, so that this will edit that particular employee's information. So you can add this feature and let others know how you implemented this feature in the comments down below. Now, if you like this video, give this video a huge fat thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more such awesome front-end interview preparation videos. And you can access the complete machine coding interview preparation playlist by clicking the link in the description down below.